Okay, welcome back to the second half of this issue of the Atheist Christian Book Club. We are a monthly gathering of both skeptics and believers who respectfully discuss important books from both perspectives. Our book today is Stealing from God by Frank Turek, and we're whoever that guy is, and we are very, very blessed to be able to have Frank with us. This is, I think, the fourth or fifth time we've had the author of the book at the club with us, and not by video conferencing, but actually with us. And so thanks again for being here for us. And so I can't remember exactly where we left off. I think we had a question back there we wanted to pick up with. Yes, Bob. Yeah, Bob.
Yeah, Bob. Yeah. Some folks in this group know me a little bit, but for purposes of leading to the question, what they know about me is I don't subscribe to atheism. I cannot go there, but then I don't do religion either. I live a God-centered life, so I'm a definite believer in God, but I don't do the trappings of religion. And by doing that, I understand that there are a lot of things we don't know. There are certain things we do, but I'm willing to accept the things we don't know. That was my leading to the question. I heard you, if I was understanding correctly, you were giving some very specific descriptions of God and some what seemed like very specific descriptions of God's modus operandi. And my question is, how can you be specific, and based on what do you know this?
I think what we do, Bob, is we reason from effect to cause. So if we see a creation, we know there must be a creator. The effect is creation, the cause must be a creator. We see design in the universe and design in life, there must be a designer. We have a moral law written on our hearts, there must be a moral law giver. We have these laws of logic, and our ability to reason presupposes there's a mind, there's a source of reason. We see order in the universe, order in the fine-tuning of the universe, and also the laws of nature, which are precise and consistent. They do the same thing over and over again. There must be an orderer. There must be a mind behind that. We have consciousness. That's the effect. We suppose there must be a consciousness that gave us consciousness. So we're reasoning from effect to cause. And that doesn't mean we can know God completely. We can apprehend God even if we can't completely comprehend God. Much like you could stand in front of an ocean and apprehend there's an ocean in front of you, even if you can't completely comprehend what's in the ocean. Someone said this, and I think it was a good insight. He said, it would be strange if an infinite God wasn't strange to us. And so while we can't know certainly everything about God, I think we can apprehend some truths about God. Among them, Him being spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent, moral, these kinds of things. And I think you can get that, as I say, reasoning from effect to cause. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm not going to debate you, because I don't think that this is what this group is about, and I do respect your opinion and where you come from. But what I'm hearing is, what you're actually doing is taking what you do know and taking, for want of a better expression, a leap of faith and building an image of what you think you know.
Well, I don't know how much faith it takes to say that if space-time and matter had a beginning, for example, that the cause couldn't be made of space-time and matter. And must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal.
So you're not taking the Kierkegaardian leap of faith in any sense?
No, I think it's a rational conclusion based on the evidence. Just like if I were to say that, I don't know if I can come up with an illustration here. I've been up too long and talking too long. I'm sorry.
But like Francis Schaeffer says, you're not just taking a blind leap of faith. It's like he uses the illustration of you're on a mountain and the guy says, hey, I know these cliffs, I know these mountain ranges. So you're saying there is solid evidence to take that Kierkegaardian leap.
Well, I actually think there's a difference between belief that and belief in. Belief that is getting evidence to say that God exists, that Jesus rose from the dead. And that's all evidentiary based. But going from belief that to belief in, which is a trust position, is something that isn't just of the head like belief that is, it's of the heart as well.
Sure.
Like, for example, everyone in here not only believes that these chairs can hold you up, but you trust in them to hold you up. You really didn't think about it when you sat down. But I'll tell you, tomorrow when I get on the plane to go back to Charlotte, I'm going to believe that the pilots are skilled, and then I'm going to trust in them by getting on the plane. And
especially if it's a Boeing.
yeah, that's right. It's a Max 8. I'm walking. All right. No, so see, there's a difference between belief that and belief in, and the Bible never says to take a leap of faith. It's faith in the Bible means trusting in what you have good reason to believe. Trusting in. So it's the better word is trust today, not faith, because faith means even in our own book. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. It's used in the colloquial sense, like, oh, you don't have any evidence, right? So you're just taking a leap. But in reality, it means to trust in. Like when I first met my wife 34 years ago, I got evidence that she would be a good wife. But all the evidence in the world didn't make her my wife. I had to take a step of trust in her to ask her to be my wife. And in a momentary lapse of judgment, she said yes. So I'm trying to go from belief that to belief in. And everybody then has the free will. Even if you assent to belief that, you don't have to go to belief in. In fact, James, the half-brother of Jesus who wrote that little book in the New Testament called? James. Thank you, you guys are very sharp. He said even the demons believe that God exists, but they tremble. I mean, they know intellectually, if they exist and God exists, they know God exists better than we do, but they don't trust in Him.
Well, as a lasered wind down, because I have no intention of monopolizing this room, there are too many important...
I wish you would, because I love that accent. Where are you from? Where are you from, Bob?
It took a few years of practice, and I'm just glad I...
Where are you from?
West Texas.
West Texas, Australia?
West Texas, England.
England.
But as a wind down to my little space here is as part of my beliefs, I subscribe a little bit to the Native American Indian culture, you know, red men, and we refer at times to God as the great mystery, and that's good enough for me. I know there is a higher power, and I know that there are no accidents in this world, and that there is a design, an intelligent design. I believe that, but I don't profess to know what God is like, how His modus operandi is.
But Bob, if the Great Spirit, so to speak, came and sacrificed Himself to take your punishment on Himself, would you take that pardon from Him?
Well, this would be a long discussion, and I couldn't say yes or no. No, I don't believe in the Jesus story.
Why not?
I believe in God.
Why not?
I don't.
He's Jewish.
Well,
so was Jesus.
I'm just trying to help.
Is this a problem?
Let me ask it this way. How much is this comes down to evidential, factual, weighing evidence versus volitional, a decision?
Yeah, well,
Good
that's
question, yeah.
all of us have the capacity to suppress what we don't want to be true. Christians can do it, atheists can do it, everybody in between. It goes back to your confirmation bias thing too, Bill. I mean, all of us have the ability and probably, in fact, let's just take religion out of it
I'm
for a
going to sit
second.
down and...
Okay.
Thanks, Bob.
Let's just take religion in the question.
He loves that. He gives sermons on suppressing the truth,
Right.
and he accuses us atheists of suppressing the truth.
Is he
In love, by
Is
the way.
he suppressing the truth about that, do you think?
I don't know.
No?
Well, I see it in my own life, so I'm not
Sure.
surprised to find it in the life of others.
So do you believe us atheists are suppressing the truth? I mean, you've laid out the evidence. We've read the books. Are we suppressing the truth?
Well, it could be, certainly. Or it could be that you're at a point now where you no longer believe God exists honestly. And according to the Christian scriptures, that's a possibility. Why? Because Paul talks about it in Romans chapter 1. That if we suppress the truth long enough, God's going to give us up to our own desires. Right? So that could be the case. But I want to take religion out of it for a second. Everybody in this room, and everybody outside this room, has gotten mad at somebody for telling you the truth and you knew it was the truth.
Right.
Why? Because you didn't want them exposing the truth. You wanted to do your own thing. I probably did that today with my wife. Right? We suppress the truth because we want to get what we want. And that's why I always ask people if Christianity were true, to become a Christian. And I've had many atheists tell me no.
Oh yeah, Matt Dillahunty said that to James.
Yeah. Which, okay, he's an atheist and he doesn't want there to be a God, that's fine. Christopher Hitchens called himself an anti-theist, not an atheist. So did Lawrence Krauss. He's an anti-theist. He doesn't want God to exist. At least you know where he stands. He's being honest, right?
Right.
But that's not a truly open position, then.
By the way, we read a book called The Language of God by Francis Collins.
Yes.
And Francis Collins, for you who don't know, is a Christian who believes in evolution. And he laid out the evidence that we have a type of gene missing that's been deactivated that makes vitamin C. And he laid out a good case for evolution.
Yeah, unfortunately, since then, his case has been overturned.
Ooh, really?
Oh, yeah, because he started talking about junk DNA, and junk DNA since 2006 has been determined not to be junk DNA.
But isn't
It
that
actually
overstating
has
the case?
function.
It's not. There's still a lot of DNA that's not.
As the
useful.
longer we go, the more we realize that the non-coding regions of DNA are still doing functions in the body. They're not leftover junk from some sort of Darwinian
Were you going to
process.
say something, Ken?
There's a really good
Come up here and talk loud.
Yeah,
There's
talk
a
real
really
loud
good
because they can't
article
hear you
on
back
the-
there.
On the BioLogos site that addresses that very question, and I think Christians or anti-evolutionists have very quickly jumped on the bandwagon because it suits their view of things, but there's definitely still a lot of junk DNA. And the ENCODE project was only looking for biochemical activity and calling that functional. Just because biochemical activity exists does not make it functional. There are onion species that have 5 times more DNA than humans, or even 5 times more DNA than related onion species.
Yeah, but that's a problem for atheists, not for Christians, because DNA itself is a message which seems to require a mind. So if
Right.
an onion has 5 times as much as the...
Right.
Who
We-
made
we
the
can-
onion?
Yeah, we can talk about that, but that's
Okay.
a different
Who wrote the
subject.
program?
Yeah.
But can you be a Christian? Because Christians that heard Francis Collins, went to one of his talks, walked out of the room. Can you be a Christian and be an
Yeah, of course you
evolutionist?
can.
Okay.
Yeah, of course
So,
you can. I think macroevolution's fault's on the merits. Whether or not the Bible teaches it is
Oh my
the
gosh.
reason.
The great Aaron Ra. Oh, by the way, this is the largest group we've had other than Aaron Ra.
No, Richard Carrier, but he
Richard
blew
Carrier.
that out of the water.
But anyway, and I heard, James, you got to touch
But before we
that.
go on, I think Ken had one more thing to add there.
I had one of my prepared questions that relates directly to what we were talking about. Is it possible, on page 71 in your book, you says, the atheists accuse intelligent design proponents of, quote, not doing science and endangering sexual freedom everywhere. All right,
That's a joke.
End of quote. Yeah, it's a joke, but it's got a little bit of a
Yeah.
barb to it.
Yeah.
So the barb being that the implicit argument is that oftentimes people who believe in evolution do so in order to justify their sexual
And many of
freedom.
them have admitted that, yeah.
Yes, but how do you view the motives of evolutionary creationists and ID critics like evangelical Francis Collins? Is he concerned about the endangerment of sexual freedom? Or take me, I've never kissed anybody except my wife in all my life.
He didn't get the message. We're atheists. We can do what we want.
Right. He's been married here 27 years, never strayed.
He's working.
Do I accept evolution to justify my sexual freedom?
No, I'm not saying all did that. That's a joke. I mean, it's commonly known that many people. In fact, Christopher Hitchens' biggest problem with Christianity was sexual freedom. He admitted it. Yeah.
But
So
it doesn't
I
mean
mean,
that all.
no, not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
But that message doesn't really come out very well in your book.
What doesn't?
The fact that there are people who believe the way they do, not in Christianity, but non-Christians who believe the way they do for reasons other than a simple search for the truth. In other words, I think it comes across, whether you say it explicitly or not, that the overwhelming majority of people who don't believe like you do so in order to reject the authority that otherwise they
Well,
would.
it's very more prominent than you think. And let me just say this, Ken. I've been on hundreds of college campuses, and I can tell you with pretty good certainty that the elephant in the room on a college campus is not evidence. The elephant in the room is morality and accountability. In fact, if you want to know the real truth, the elephant in the room is sex. People don't want anybody telling them they can't do what they want to do sexually.
Well, a good example is Richard Carrier that was here, who said to his wife after putting him through school, "Hey, look, I'm out of here. It's been great, but I'm polyamorous," is what
Yeah.
he said. So, and he was honest about it. You got to give him credit.
How many
Yeah.
were here for Richard Carrier when he said that to us? And not only did he say he was polyamorous, but he made the case that that's the most moral position that we can come to.
Based on
And,
what standard?
Exactly.
His standard.
He wrote the book Sense and Good News Without God, and even a lot of his atheist friends are saying that's not sensible or good.
But Ken, your point is well taken. Motivation does not necessarily prove whether somebody's right or not.
We all have
Because
our
somebody
motives,
can
right?
have a motivation, like I could have a motivation, and I want it to be true, say, and maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah,
right?
it's
So
just my worry is that the tone of the book comes across as though, even though you're not saying all atheists believe that way because they want to get authority off their backs and have sex with their girlfriend or whatever, that's the message that comes through, whether that's what you're saying explicitly.
Well, yeah,
But
maybe.
it's close to being explicit.
Yeah, I'm from New Jersey. I'm sorry.
By the way, one of your best points, I thought, as an atheist, is that the DNA, what determines the proteins and the information is not the chemistry, but the order of the amino acids, the cytosine, the, thymine. Can you elaborate
Well,
on
yeah,
that?
the spine of the DNA molecule, how the letters, go together this way, but how they go up the spine, up and down the spine of the DNA molecule is not determined by any known physical or chemical process. It's like the zeros and ones that are in this computer program right here are put in there by a mind, and DNA appears to be digital code. And as you know, as you read Meyer's book, that's what he's saying. And so the problem is, how do you get digital code from the four known natural forces? And Stephen Meyer's been touring the country asking every atheist who'll debate him, how do you get digital code from the four known natural forces?
Jim has
And none of them will.
He's repenting investigations.
None of them will really engage in debate with him because there really is no answer to that. In other words, it's not a God of the gaps argument. It's not like we're arguing from what we don't know. We're arguing from what we do know. We know that every time there's a message, it always comes from a mind. So if you have a message 3.2 billion letters long in every one of the 40 trillion cells in a human being, where does that come from if not from a mind?
Well, one of the early theory, though, was that the simpler forms of life, like an amoeba or something like that, had maybe a much more simple structure to it. Some basic 3 or 4 chemicals mixed together.
Yeah, Richard Dawkins pulled that out of the water.
Well, yeah, what we now know is that even the simplest form of life has extremely complex DNA sequencing. So how do you get there?
But the other problem, though, let's say grant an amoeba DNA. How do you modify an amoeba's DNA and add to it and get function at the same time? If we began to modify the code behind Microsoft PowerPoint right now, what would happen in short order? Yeah, the whole thing would crash, right? You don't get more function, you get degradation. The thing shuts down. But can I just ask our atheist friends here just a couple of questions, because I've debated some atheists and I can't just get a straight answer from them if they're materialists. Now, Bill, you say you're not a materialist. Okay, that's fine.
Well, kind of.
Okay, all right. I'm trying to figure out how some of the things I have up on the screen here can be explained by materials. First of all, the universe itself seems to have come from non-material. Fine-tuning is a process that includes natural laws, and that appears to be the product of a mind. The laws of logic and mathematics are immaterial realities that we're using right now. Objective moral values. If you believe in objective moral values, I think everybody in their heart knows there are objective moral values. The code that we just mentioned is immaterial. It's expressed in materials, but the order in which the letters go, that's immaterial. That's a mind imposed on those letters. And so, would I ask Michael Shermer, would I ask, sorry, geez, get late, Christopher Hitchens, and Jeffrey Lauder, who, by the way, the best guy I debated was Jeffrey Lauder. And he's not even he's great. Jeffrey's a great guy, and he actually brought arguments for his side. I've noticed that people like Shermer and Hitchens and others, they didn't really have arguments for their worldview. They had complaints about the way God is running the universe. Now, it's easy to smell a rotten egg. It's hard to lay a better one. Okay, you might think Christianity's rotten, but what's your
you don't understand, Frank, we're actively suppressing the truth here. So,
no,
we can't help ourselves.
But seriously,
your question, though,
seriously though, what is the foundation of immaterial reality if you're a materialist? How do you explain these things?
Number 1, 2, 5, and 6, and kind of indirectly, we've already touched on 1, 2, 5, and 6. 3, 4, and 7 we've kind of hit on as a side note. I could ask, I've got a question I could ask that's related to that. But first, if I could ask just one question. Yeah, it's an honor to have you here. Of course, we already told you you shattered all other records for any public speaker we've had so far. So thank you for
Is my
coming.
mom here?
This kind of group is a breath of fresh air, not just for me. I speak for pretty much anyone that comes to this regularly. I feel that we're rare. There's another group here locally, the Bible and Beer Consortium. I feel that it's a little bit more confrontational than this. A group like this where believers and non-believers can get together, break bread, and talk about the big questions. I think we're pretty rare. There's a group in London I know of that Justin Brierley runs.
Oh, yeah.
Other than that, I feel we're somewhat unique. In your travels, the question is, how rare is this? Have you seen this type of phenomenon, and do you think this needs to happen more often to fight the division?
I wish
right now?
it would happen more often. I've already been invited to the Bible and Beer. Is that what you call
Oh,
it?
yeah.
Okay, yeah. We just don't have a date yet. So yeah, I wish more people would do this. I know there's probably places that do it. Do you know any, Brady? What's that? You know any places that are doing this?
Other than one he mentioned.
No. I mean, I'm sure they're out there. We just might not. Oh, you know who? Well, it's not the same things. Eric Metaxas was doing Socrates in the City, but it's more kind of lecture oriented than this. This is kind of more interactive. But no, this is great, Jim, and I'm glad you guys are doing it, and you guys have all come together to do it. But again, I just want to see if you've read or you know anybody.
Yeah, what's your answer to his question?
Why? Can I just pick one out of the hat?
Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead.
So what I was kind of brooding on earlier was the timeless being, an intelligent agent that exists outside of time. And the way I see it, you can rip this apart, feel free, because I really just, I'm on the weight cups here. I'm only thinking about it in a cursory manner, but time is a measurement of movement through space. If there was no movement, no atomic activity whatsoever, would be no need for the actual measurement of time. The Earth spinning around its axis one time, that's 24 hours. The Earth going around the sun one time, we call that 1 year. Time is measured in movement through space. So I know this seems like, is God so all-powerful? Can he push, an immovable rock, those. So it's kind of like that. It's not meant to be a gotcha question, but if God is outside of time, would he be able to move? Would he even be able to move his mouth to say, let there be light? Do you see where I'm...
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and there have been some proposals for that. The time that we know about had a beginning. Is there a metaphysical time? Something William Lane Craig has mentioned, possibly. Right? Or, again, since we come to conclusions in sequence, we think everything has to happen in time, but God doesn't. God doesn't do in sequence. In fact, some theologians talk about infrasuperlapsarianism, and you go, what the heck is that? Well, that's the order in which God decrees things. Well, I think it's a moot point, because God doesn't have any order in how he decrees things, because everything in his mind just exists. So he doesn't need time to deliberate, so to speak, Now again, do I understand this completely? No, I don't have time for that. But these are just some things to think about. But can I just go back to this point again? Just pick the laws of logic, say. How do these exist on a materialistic worldview?
Did logic and reason exist prior to Judeo-Christianity?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
so,
he just said that.
You're right. I know he touched on it earlier, but we couldn't have... I'm kind of weird in my stance on morality. I avoid the following 6 words: good, evil, right, wrong, should, and ought. So when I talk about morality,
Yeah.
no, me personally, I feel that it's a much more productive conversation when we talk about morality and ethics if we avoid those 6 words, and it's way harder than you think. Try it. Take out good, evil, right, wrong, should, and ought.
But Jim, why would you take out what you are intuitively inclined to use, because it's just built into the universe?
Just as a thought experiment, if we took out those 6 words, we would get to a point, it's kind of same heresy, but morality only is that which increases well-being and it simultaneously decreases suffering. And that can be totally, who said it? Justin? Or someone said, it's very utilitarian, but it gets us to the same road of morality.
The problem, though, is utilitarianism presupposes a moral standard.
It's arbitrary and it's abstract. But if it keeps societies glued together...
And shouldn't well-being also come off the list of vocabulary?
Yeah,
because
well-being and suffering can be objectively measured.
But well and good, aren't they synonymous?
Good, those are arbitrary. That's based on just personal
But
subjectivity.
aren't well and good synonymous?
Goodness?
But increasing well-being and decreasing suffering, that can be, we can all agree on that. And that can be, you can take that to a laboratory.
Okay, but let me just say one thing about that, though, Jim. it's not a matter of people agreeing. That's not the point.
Right.
Because if the Nazis had won World War II and brainwashed everybody to believe that murdering Jews, homosexuals, and gypsies was right, and everybody agreed on that, that wouldn't make it right. Right?
It would have collapsed world society.
Well, it may have. No,
Which would
the Aryan race would have been
suffering.
just fine. Okay? So, that's
But
the
even that
point.
mentality would have eaten on, it would have become a, I don't know how to say it, the snake, Ouroboros, it would become a snake eating its own tail.
Maybe not. Maybe
It
we
would
just
have
got
lost
we just would have gotten rid of homosexuals, Jews, gypsies, and Jehovah's Witnesses.
There's always going to be homosexuals, it's a base 10% of the population.
Well, that's a whole nother topic, but let's not.
Anyway,
even go
Bryson
there.
has.
Okay,
Bryson,
sorry.
do you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to talk about that as well. Like, you talked about homosexuality a little bit.
All right, can we come back to that, Bryson? I still want to get. See, this is the problem. I ask I'm not just picking on you guys. I mean, I've asked the top atheists in the world. Give me a material explanation for the laws of logic.
And I just took it back to Greek,
No, you went to morality.
Oh, yeah, I
So,
did.
for example, the law of
Speak up.
the law of identity, that a thing is what it is, it can't be something else than what it is. So the question I would put back to you, and then we'll get to my answer, would be, can God be anything other than what he is? In other words, is he himself subject to the law of identity?
I would argue that his nature is the ground of the laws of logic. That's the point. But from a materialistic standpoint, how do you have these immaterial laws that allow you and me to communicate
What I'm
right
suggesting is that God is subject himself, even your view of God is subject himself to the law of identity. I'm specifically focusing on that one subset of logic, laws of logic, that one law of logic.
No, you're assuming that these laws are outside of God. I'm saying they are characteristics of his nature. He's not subject to things beyond him. He is the standard. See, there's a point where you have to, the buck has to stop somewhere. The ground of all being has to stop somewhere, and that's God's nature.
But in any world, it's unimaginable that the law of identity could not hold.
That's right, because God is the ground of reality.
And there are immaterial things like dollars. Like you have it, other than a dollar bill, but a dollar in my bank account, that's an immaterial thing. As a non-theist, I hold to certain non-material things like dollars, concepts that we use. They're useful to talk about. That doesn't mean they require some divine provenance or grounding.
But you're admitting they're immaterial realities. They're
Sure,
abstract
they're
objects.
They're useful ways of talking about relationships.
But they're not just useful ways. Let me put the situation this way. Let's say there were no human beings on the earth.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be true that there are no human beings on the earth? Would that statement be true?
Sure.
Okay, so what you're saying here is, correctly I think, that the laws of logic are not grounded in human minds.
Right.
They're grounded in a mind,
Mhm.
but not our minds.
They describe realities.
Descriptive, not prescriptive.
The laws of logic are just descriptive, not prescriptive?
So, for example, if there were nothing to count, there would be no numbers. That's my perspective. It would be nonsensical to even talk about numbers if there was nothing to count. But as soon as you have things to count, then numbers have
I think you would be confusing epistemology and ontology there.
Could you define that real quickly for us?
Yeah, ontology is the study of the thing that exists, being. Epistemology is how you know the thing exists. And this is the problem I've had with every atheist I've debated. They always want to talk about epistemology. How do we know this? How do we know that? Let's set that aside. In fact, the debate I just had with Michael Shermer, he kept talking about how do you know right from wrong? I said, Michael, you and I agree on basic right and wrong. Let's not talk about how we know it. Let's talk about why this thing we know exists. That's outside of ourselves. And this is still my frustration. I'm sorry to get frustrated about this, but maybe because I'm asking the unanswerable question. And it's unanswerable if everything's made of molecules that immaterial things would exist, yet we know immaterial things exist. Laws of logic, laws of math, objective moral laws. We couldn't even have a conversation with without these things existing, yet here we are.
Well, that's a little bit different, separate issues. I mean, our ability to communicate is not based on things we're talking about actually existing. Like we can share a concept of a unicorn, and we understand that because of cultural and stories and things that have been passed around. Doesn't actually mean that a unicorn exists.
Right, but Chris, we're not talking about unicorns. We're talking about the very laws which enable us to communicate and understand one another. Whether we're talking about unicorns or Big Macs, that's not the point. The point is, the laws of logic themselves, if you had your own private view of the laws of logic, your own private laws of logic, and I had my own private laws of logic. You and I couldn't communicate. The laws of logic are the immaterial bridge through which minds can communicate. If those laws didn't exist, and if they weren't objective, none of us could communicate with one another. So my question is, what grounds those?
Well, and maybe you can clarify this for me, but in your book you talk about laws of logic being grounded in God, but you also use the term self-evident to describe them.
Yeah, they are.
But if they're self-evident, which I would agree with to a certain extent, I mean, the law of identity,
Right.
A is A, rock is a rock.
Right.
That seems like super fundamentally basic.
That's
just
right.
for thought to function, and I don't understand what's saying God said this.
He didn't say it. His nature is what grounds it. See, I'm looking for grounding here.
What is that?
Yeah, define grounding for us.
Okay, well, if we both understand what the law of identity means, right? We both understand what the law of non-contradiction means, okay? And it's not just a private idea in my head or a private idea in your head. We're thinking of the same thing, right? So what accounts for this? These are external to us. We're accessing these things. Why do they exist? If materialism is true, these things shouldn't exist, but they do. Now, how we know them, whether they're self-evident or we learn them from our senses, that's a question for epistemology. But that these things exist is an ontological question. There are three basic tasks of philosophy, or three basic categories that philosophers talk about: ethics, ontology, and epistemology. And it seems to me, so many, even the professional atheists that I talk to, never want to talk about ontology. They only want to talk about epistemology. Well, let me give you an example of the difference. I can read a book and know what the book says and claim there's no author. I can do that, right? But there would be no book to know unless there was an author. And I think the same thing is true when it comes to the laws of logic, the laws of morality. I can know them and deny there's a God. Christopher Hitchens can be just as moral as anybody else. Christopher Hitchens can know right and wrong just like anybody else. But Christopher Hitchens can't justify why right and wrong exists in an objective sense if atheism's true. Because there wouldn't even be a book. There wouldn't even be a standard. So I'm trying to get at the ontological question, and my frustration, every single atheist I've ever debated, is they act like they don't understand it. But I know Shermer's a PhD, he gets it. Maybe Hitchens didn't. He was a journalist, basically, brilliant one. But so and Lauder, the guy I debated, at the end of the debate, he said, "Well, I'm not a materialist." Well, what are you then?
Well, Frank, your logic's impeccable. I mean, we get it, okay? But here's one thing I found very troubling in one of your talks. You said the Gospels were all written pre-70 A.D. Every scholar in any university, Mark, written 65 to 70, Matthew, Luke, 85, and John in 90. Go ahead.
Let me come back to that because Bill has been waiting there, and I don't want to get off the subject before, but I want to come back to the Gospels because they're more important than the laws of logic.
The man.
Go ahead, Bill. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Time is my specialty.
Yes, sir.
One thing that to simplification is very important. When you get to all these ologies and so on, you wipe it out. You defeat the purpose. The purpose is to understand, is to communicate. In order to communicate, we need to use simple words that everybody, not just the specialists, can understand. And that's why you're not receiving word from atheists, because they don't know that.
They don't know what?
Oh, thanks for the
They don't
compliment,
know
Bill.
that
I'll take that as a compliment.
They're using the atheists are using common words, except for Bill, of course. They use common words, they use common understanding, and that's the problem we're not catching. What I want to do is let us catch it.
Okay,
Find out what
we'll
it
work
is.
on that. Okay.
What it is now there we go where I lose my train of thought. That happens to me. But
is there a question here?
Yeah, there's a question. You have to,
Talk about time.
yeah, you have to have the difference between knowing and believing.
Okay.
That's where it's all right.
What do you think? Knowing and
Now
believing.
wait. Knowing, I know we're here talking. I know that a rock is a rock. We all know that.
Right.
Basic things we know. When it comes to anything beyond that, you don't. Most things are not known. Most things are questions all the time. They change. Everything happens to them. Those should be believing. Always. Everything you're talking about is what you believe. You don't know it.
We got it. Okay. What do you think?
Do you know that?
I believe that. No, absolutely. I believe that. And believing doesn't mean you know.
Well, sometimes it does.
But
I know this is Brady
I
Blevins.
will go home tonight in my car.
Uh-huh.
That's the reason I came here. I knew that I know that I'll get home safely, but I don't know that.
Okay.
I might get in a wreck. Something could happen.
Well, okay, well
I
that yeah.
believe I'm getting home.
Yeah, we
That's
could
the-
all drop dead right now. That's for sure. We don't know. There's nothing in the future is guaranteed for us. I agree with you there.
And because of that, that eliminates the arguments. Because we don't know. All these things you're talking about.
Right, but the problem
we
is,
don't
Bill,
know.
that's a self-defeating statement. Forgive me. You're saying you know you don't know.
You just
No,
defeated yourself,
no.
Bill.
I'm
Just admit defeat.
identifying
Okay.
the words that we're using. You're saying you know that anthropology or whatever you're wanting to use is true. It's not. It's
Well,
accepted by many people, but we don't know it. And that's
Okay,
the
but
big
here's
thing.
I'll say a quick thing about this, then go to the Gospels. In order to say that somebody is wrong, you would have to know something about the subject in order to say they're wrong.
We don't know that. We're not going to say somebody's wrong. We say, I believe they're wrong. We don't know they're wrong. That's what I'm saying. Get it simple.
But in order to make any judgment at all, you have to have some knowledge. Otherwise, it's a complete
judgment
faith
is not
position.
knowing.
What's that?
A judgment is not knowing.
Are you
But
making a
Bill,
judgment?
aren't you saying that he's wrong?
No, yeah, what? No, I'm saying my judgment is that I think, I'm guessing, I'm believing.
Thanks, Bill.
Bill,
Hey, let's
okay.
get back
Bill, when
to
you-
why Dr. Turek is going against all of the scholarly consensus on when the Gospels were written.
Okay, but it's not all the
Before
scholarly
you start-
consensus. Yeah.
Start, if,
Well, he's
if
gonna-
anyone's hanging on to one final thought after this one, maybe
Yeah, sure, yeah.
we only have maybe
Yeah.
10 minutes
Yeah,
left. I'm just
yeah.
trying
Go
to,
ahead.
anyone that is sitting on a
Okay.
question and hasn't asked one before.
Go
Well,
ahead.
I could just blink everybody into eternity, then we'll have all the time we want. Here's why I think that the New Testament writers have written before 70 AD. This is, everybody, whether they're a Christian or an atheist scholar, agrees in these two things, okay? Even
Oh,
Bart
yeah, of
Ehrman
course,
agrees
yeah,
the
of
cross,
course, yeah.
okay? Let's work backwards. Paul died sometime in the mid-60s. We know that. James, the half-brother of Jesus, was killed by the Sanhedrin in 62 AD. Both Hegesippus, who lived in the 2nd century, and Josephus, who lived in the 1st century and probably witnessed it, tells us this. It's not in any New Testament document. It's
Yeah,
these
we've
other
heard that
people,
apology.
right?
Yeah.
Acts is written by 62 AD. And the reason we know that is because, for a number of reasons, there's about 13 different reasons, but one of the reasons is Acts ends abruptly in Rome. Paul is still alive, he hasn't died yet. Luke mentions two other martyrs, Stephen and James, the half-brother, or James, the brother of John. The two main characters in the book of Acts are Peter and Paul. Why hasn't he mentioned they've been assassinated? Because it hasn't happened yet. And there's other reasons too. 1 Corinthians, as everybody agrees, is written about 55 AD.
Right.
And we know that through an archaeological inscription in Delphi, found Gallio. It's a long story, but anyway, we can date Paul to 1 Corinthians in 55 AD. The Creed in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 3 to 8 is the earliest evidence for the resurrection in any of the scriptures. It's verses 3 to 8. Even people like Bart Ehrman say it's within a year or two of the resurrection.
Yeah, everybody agrees with that.
Okay, all right. So let's work backwards here. If Acts is written by 62, what must be prior to Acts? Luke. Why? Because, yeah, it came before. Luke is the author of both, and he says, in my former work, O excellent Theophilus. Most people, as you point out, say Mark is prior. Sorry, the K is off there.
Yeah,
Mark
that's
is prior.
consensus, yeah.
Okay. Also, I may be going out on a limb here, but Paul, I would think, had to have written all of his works before he died. Right? Okay. These are the undisputed works of Paul, by the way. And I would argue, and many others are arguing now, that most, if not all, the New Testament's written prior to 70 AD, even the Gospel of John. And the reason for that is, if you read John chapter 5, it says, there is, by the sheep gate, a pool known as Bethesda. I've been there several times. That pool and all of Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 A.D. Now, one of the top manuscript scholars in the world teaches right here at Dallas Theological Seminary. His name is Dan Wallace. We teach an entire course that Dan Wallace teaches for us. And during one of the Q&A sessions, I said, or actually it was one of our podcasts, I said, Dan, it appears that John is saying that the temple and the pool of Bethesda in Jerusalem is still standing when he's writing. What do you think? He said, I spent more than 100 hours researching that back in the early 1990s, and I came to the same conclusion. John is written prior to 70 A.D. Now, even if John is written later, you have all of the major works you need with the evidence for the resurrection prior to 70 A.D.
Well, I understand, but you do understand. I mean, can't you just, instead of leaning on your own understanding, trust in the knowledge of Bart Ehrman, who's an expert in the
By the way,
I mean, he's the expert. You're not, right? You're not an expert in New Testament like he is.
The top guy in the world on the resurrection, and even Bart Ehrman would admit this, is Gary Habermas.
Oh, I wouldn't agree with that at all.
Yeah, we've interviewed him on our book club.
Okay.
But he's evangelical. Can you trust anything he says?
No, absolutely not.
No, well,
You can only trust atheists, right?
Yes.
I think Bill is a closet evangelical.
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No, but again, when you ask these people why they're dating the Gospels so late, they don't have an answer.
Oh, yeah, they do.
What is it?
That Josephus, Luke was ripping off Josephus. Josephus wrote in 93 A.D., Antiquities of the Jews. So obviously, they
Luke
think...
died! There's no way Luke is right. Luke is one of the top historians in antiquity.
Just because he said it.
According to William Ramsay, what's Ramsay's first name? Sir William Ramsay. Sir William Ramsay wasn't even a believer. He thought that Luke was wrong, and he wound up going through the Mediterranean, tracking Luke down, and found that Luke was one of the top historians of antiquity. And not only that, by the way, Paul actually quotes Luke's gospel in one of his writings, and he quotes it as scripture.
But that's one of the disputed works of Paul, though. Wasn't that in one of the pastoral?
Oh yeah, First Timothy was written in 180. That is definitely not written by Paul.
That's come up in the book club before.
Yeah.
First Timothy is written.
Well, duh. Yeah, Second Timothy's not written by Paul.
Now, look, Bill uses
This is a very long discussion.
You can
don't forget the
First Thessalonians? I mean, that wasn't written by Paul or Second Thessalonians. No way.
People can say whatever they want. The problem is you need evidence. You can't just say, well, it's written late. How do you know it's written late?
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary.
Look, here was Sir William Ramsay. Sir William Ramsay spent 20 years of research in the area Luke wrote about. His conclusion was that Luke references 32 countries, 54 cities, and 9 islands with no mistakes. No Google Earth, Bill. Luke was there.
No, I think Luke has some historicity. Don't get me wrong, but we've had Richard Carrier here, and he says, read, the myth of whatever, and he says Luke acts as a joke. It is not historical. It's like a travel log, where you have prison outbreaks and you meet exotic people like the Ethiopian eunuch. So there's just no reason to believe that.
This could be a 3-hour
Oh yeah. And someone else said.
Do we have time for one more? Probably. Is there any saved rounds that didn't get a chance to speak yet?
There, here we go.
Yeah, hey, my name's Carlton. My question just involved the law of causality, which ironically is the first one for the C.
Yeah.
A lot of times when I offer cosmological arguments, and I know obviously the first chapter deals with this, question the law of causality. And so in yours, you talk about the laws of logic and how appealing to them. I guess there's causal links between the premise.
Yeah.
I've never really thought of logic in that sense. So can you kind of go more in depth about what the causal links between premise A and B are?
Yeah, well, here's the problem. Sometimes people will say, well, the law of causality only applies to physical things, right? Well, if that's the case, you shouldn't believe anything you think, because if the law of causality only applies to physical things, that means every thought you have could only arise from the laws of physics, and the laws of physics are blind and dumb. So how do they give you true thoughts?
Right.
They don't. Secondly, and I'm looking for a slide here. I thought I had it here, but I might not have it here. Just stand by for just a second. Let's see where was it. Here it is. The law of causality is metaphysical, not just physical. And the reason for that is otherwise there would be no causal connections between premises and conclusions. Thus, no arguments against God would work. Let's say here's an argument against God. I don't think it's a good one, but people bring it up. They'll say if God exists, gratuitous evil does not exist. Gratuitous evil exists, therefore God does not exist. Well, if causality only works on physical things, these premises aren't physical. Yet, the conclusion, if the premises are true, follows. So if there's no metaphysical causality, if you're an atheist, you can't say any argument you give against God actually works, because arguments aren't physical. Right? So, I know this can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough. So to say that causality only involves physical things is to say that only material causes exist. Well, obviously, the greatest counterexample to that is the universe itself. The universe had a beginning and it had no material cause. Materiality came into existence. Also, as I mentioned before, if our mind and brain are the same, in other words, we really don't have a mind, we just have a brain, why should we think anything is true? We're just molecular machines. We're just moist robots, to use someone said that.
I think we have time for. Was that answer? First of all, did that answer your question, or
yes? Only thing I would think a skeptic might say something like, let's say premise 1, premise 2. Is premise 1 causing premise 2 to be true? Like, what is the cause?
Well, logic wouldn't work though if it didn't. But let me say, why are skeptics skeptical of everything but skepticism? You know, and in fact, a question I'd like to pose to everybody in the room is I've heard some atheists say, well, there's no evidence for God, and I just want to back off that for a second and say, why is there evidence for anything? Why is this such a world where we can ascertain truths about it and draw conclusions? It seems to me because this is an orderly world put together by an orderer. I mean, certainly the world isn't random. If it was random, we couldn't even draw any conclusions about anything. You wouldn't even know what random was unless you knew what order was, and you wouldn't know what order was unless there was an orderer.
You can't have miracles either.
No.
We wouldn't be around if the world were truly random. We couldn't exist.
Right. The question is, though, we have this effect, this order. What's the cause of this?
Well, so
there's an answer. So the answer is that that human mind is not relevant. It is not of its own self a truth unless it's based in reality. And reality comes from the intelligibility. This is Aquinas that God put into the world and into our thoughts and everything. And that's why, back to the earlier discussion, we can talk about these things because we're talking about real things that are intelligible. Without that intelligibility, then nothing makes sense.
Yes, the rational intelligibility of the universe. And by the way, you remind me of John Lennox, because you look like John Lennox, too. And that is the argument that John Lennox always makes. You know who John Lennox is?
No, I don't know.
Oh, no! You gotta look up John Lennox. When you see him, when he stars in a movie, you'll be his double. By the way, John Lennox debated Richard Dawkins several times, and Lennox is the nicest, most jovial Irishman you'll ever meet. And Lennox, Dawkins, as you know, can be a bit of a sourpuss on occasion, which is why one reviewer who was watching the debate said, watching John Lennox debate Richard Dawkins was like watching Santa Claus debate the devil.
He looks like Santa.
Yes, he does. But the rational intelligibility of the universe seems to me, anyway, to presuppose a mind. We're reasoning from effect, or rational intelligibility, to a cause. And this is the essence of science. That's what scientists do. They reason from effect back to cause.
Quick question for Jim. Where's Jim? Jim is with Atheist Edge.
There was no good questions on the live chat.
Okay.
I apologize.
Okay, I just want to double check before we go. We probably then have time for maybe one more question or comment.
Yeah, I have one.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Bryson, back to you. I forgot. I'm sorry.
It's all right. So I was going to say that in your book, it seemed like you were equating like abortion and other these moral evils to homosexuality. And I wanted to ask, in what way, without appealing to any biblical text or anything like that, would you say that homosexuality is a self-evident moral evil? Or would you not describe it in that way?
Well, that has always been the case throughout history, generally.
although there were societies, as you know, that allowed it, it's always been known as against nature, just biologically, obviously, the anatomical setup. I mean, men and women are complementary. 2 men, 2 women are not complementary. They're not made for one another. Okay, so this is not any eureka type argument. It's been around for a long time. But look, when people ask me about homosexuality, I say, look, I'm not the moral arbiter of the universe. Okay, this isn't my morality. I didn't make it up. I'm just observing what not only natural law has said for eons, but every society until 10 minutes ago said was for eons, and what the scriptures have said. By the way, not just the Christian scriptures, but just about every scripture, whether you're talking about the Quran, the Old Testament, the New Testament, I mean, they're all agree that sex between a man and a woman is the norm and what should be, obviously, for procreation, to perpetuate and stabilize society, and homosexuality doesn't do that.
Which, so when it comes up in like nature, because I've seen, been presented with like, I think it's either dolphins or some other mammals, they have homosexuality come up. Would you then say that that's a product of maybe the fall or something? Like, where would it come up?
Well, I would say that some animals eat their young too, but you don't expect us to do that, right?
Right.
In other words, I think when people try and make the argument that they find something in the animal world, I mean, you find animals killing and ripping one another apart all the time. We don't look down for our moral precepts. We look up. And I think when we're looking down at the animal world, we're looking in the wrong direction. So there's a lot of things that animals do that we don't do. I mean, I have to stop my dog from eating her own crap half the time, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm not looking to the animals to give us our moral cues.
But we take care of all of that through the government, these laws, society passes. And that's what
I passed a law at my house that my dog doesn't eat her crap, but she still does it. I'm sorry.
That's what I'm saying. We pass the laws. That's the answer. Making it simple again, and nobody wants to be simple. But we correct errors, we correct problems. Even homosexuality is something that is natural. It's not very common, but it will happen.
Well, the whole political discussion is another discussion.
Yeah.
He was just asking a moral question.
By the way, Frank, on one of your students, they were talking about hell, which is very relevant to us atheists, you know, because it does seem like a huge price to pay for non-belief that after the first billion years of torment and whatever, and you kind of soft-pedaled it saying that, oh, it's just outer darkness, and you don't want to be, you love the old C.S. Lewis thing, we're locking it from the inside. Why can't you just be like a good Calvinist and say, look, you're a depraved, wretched human being, and the wrath of God is justly... Why can't you do that?
Because I'm not a Calvinist.
Oh! Sorry, Todd, I asked the question.
I wasn't predestined to be one.
Okay.
But I believe in hell, and you may have seen me use this illustration before. I was at the University of Michigan with Eddie Tabash, who's an atheist you may have heard of. He's a Beverly Hills attorney, and he asked me a question during the debate. He said, my mother was a survivor of the Holocaust. She lived a life full of pain and suffering, and toward the end of her life, someone offered her the gospel, but she rejected it. And then she died. Is she in hell right now? And so I said, Eddie, I don't know where your mother is now. I don't know if she had a deathbed conversion or not. But if she didn't accept Christ before she died, then God is too loving to force her into heaven against her will. Because the assumption behind the question is that everybody wants to go to heaven. That is not true. People have been running from Jesus their entire lives. What's he going to do in the afterlife? Hey, where are you going? You're with me now, right? That wouldn't be very loving. You say, wait a minute, what's this business of hell, though? So I used an illustration with the University of Michigan audience that night. In fact, I'll use it with you folks here. In fact, there's only a few ladies who will be able to answer this question. It's a question for the ladies.
Oh, there you go.
And the question is, ladies, have you ever had a man pursue you whom you did not want to date? Yeah, some of you are going, he's sitting next to me right now. He will not leave me alone. Well, suppose this man continues to pursue, and he keeps asking you out, and you finally say, look, I like you, but only as a
friend.
Ladies, why don't you just stick the knife in and turn it
Every man has heard the dreaded friend rejection. Gentlemen, if you ever get the dreaded friend rejection, I have some advice for you. Move on. She's not interested. In fact, I have some shocking news for you. She doesn't even like you as a friend. Because if she did, she'd be interested, but she's not. Right? Well, suppose this doesn't deter this guy. He keeps coming, he keeps coming. He gets to the point where he says, look, I love you so much, I'm going to force you to love me. Run, screaming from the building. Ladies, can he do that? No, he can't force you to love him. Why? Because love by definition must be freely given. If he truly did love you, what would he do?
Let you go.
Yeah, he would leave you alone. Well, that's what God does for us. He sends us cards, letters, and flowers. He sends us creation. He sends us conscience. He sends us design. He sends us Christ. He sends us a Bible. He sends us the atheist Christian book club. Right? He sends us all these things. And if we keep saying no, 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 God will give us up to our own desires. And he will separate himself from us. Now you say, well, what about hell? Well, think about it this way. Everybody, no matter who they are, whether they're a Christian or not, experiences some of the common grace of God. Everybody experiences love, relationships, hope for a future. We experience all these things. But I want you to imagine a place where there is no love. There are no relationships. There is no hope. There is no future. There's just stone cold narcissistic self-absorption. That is Washington. That is hell. When you are cut off from the ultimate source of goodness, God leaves you alone. Now, it's an awful place to be, but you've decided to be there. And C.S. Lewis famously said this: there's only two kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God says, thy will be done. There's no other way of doing it. Look, if there is an afterlife, and there's only two possible destinations. You're either going to be with God in the afterlife, that's heaven, or you're going to be separated from God in the afterlife, that's hell. And you have locked the door
Third
from the
option
inside.
is annihilation.
If there's an afterlife, I said. Yeah.
You could have afterlife for the believers, but not for the
Conditional.
non-believers.
Or you could have a temporary afterlife for the.
Right.
Now, Bill, you don't go to hell because, how did you put it? Because of disbelief. That would be like saying you die because you didn't go to the doctor. No, you go to hell because you sin. You die because you have a disease. Now, maybe if you're going to the doctor, you could have prevented that. And if you go to the great physician, you can prevent that as well. So it's not because you don't believe, it's because you haven't, you've sinned and you haven't gotten a pardon for that
But Frank,
sin.
how about people like me who accepted Jesus at 17, and Ken, who was on the mission fields of Africa, in the hottest part of Africa, giving his life for the gospel, and Chris, who worked at a Christian bookstore? What do you say to us that did believe and were born again and have looked at the evidence and found it one?
Door's still open.
I like the physician analogy, but let's take it all the way. If we have a disease and God has the cure to the disease, if He loves us, He will give us the cure whether we want it or not.
Oh no, that would be like saying that the guy pursuing the woman is going to force himself on the woman, whether she wants it or not.
If there's a way, I don't want to get into a rapey analogy, so I'm going to...
Too late.
If the consequence is get the shot or die, and whether or not the person with the disease is aware of it or not, whether or not they want the shot, if you love them, but you do not give them the shot, what does that say about you?
It says you respect the free choice of the individual. You respect what the person wants, because giving them the shot, they're going to be misfits with God. This is what C.S. Lewis famously wrote in his book, The Great Divorce.
But who cares if you're going to be a misfit? You'll be alive.
No, but you won't want to be there. You won't want to be with
All this
God.
presupposes that we have to keep going on forever against our will. What if we just want to cease to exist? I know your answer is that we're created in the image of God, but that's an ad hoc explanation. He can choose if he wants to just to get rid of us. Why
Well, let me ask
carry
you
out our
this.
suffering for eternity ad infinitum?
If you have a son who decides to be a plumber and you wanted him to be a doctor,
If he becomes a plumber, should you just shoot him?
No, if he shoots himself, I mean, he has that choice. I'm not going to go and shoot him, but if I decide, if I end up in hell, for example, I don't think the Christian religion is true, but I could be wrong, and I could end up on the other side of eternity with a surprise, a big surprise on my hands. But if I knew that my life was going to go on for eternity, and I was even going to be mildly suffering for eternity, I would want to just terminate my existence. But you're saying that God is forcing me to continue my existence in a state of suffering forever. That's what I object to. That.
Well, you have a moral objection then, Ken, and no
No,
moral
it's a
standard by which
self-interest.
to judge
It's a
it.
self-interest objection.
Okay.
Do you not see that?
Well, but you see, you don't. If you're objecting to that, why don't you just accept the free gift and come into the kingdom?
Well, because I don't think it's true.
He did it fine.
I just said that.
Okay. Well,
Are we really Christians?
if it were true, would you accept it?
Yes.
Yeah, let's do this. We're about I have to call time on it. Bob, is it real quick? Can we do it real quick? Real quick from Bob, and then that's going to be it.
So forget what you tell Bill about his relationship with God, Jesus, whatever.
Bill, who? Oh, this Bill.
Bill,
I'm sorry.
He
Okay.
has no relationship.
A very quick two-part question. Number one is, what would you say to the person that lives on the far corner of this round world that's never heard of the Judeo-Christian God concept and doesn't know who Jesus is? That's question number one. And question number two, would you agree with this statement that Gandhi is burning in hell and God help the Dalai Lama when he dies?
Okay, first of all, that would presuppose that someone's behavior is what gets them into heaven, right?
Or belief.
Okay. Let me just let's deal with the first question first, and that is, what about those that have never heard? Right? Because you get this question a lot. Now, according to Christian theology, the truth of the matter is Christ's sacrifice is necessary for salvation. Because if you could get to heaven any other way, what's God sending His only Son to die a brutal death for? What's the reason? There would be no reason. In fact, Paul says in Galatians chapter 2, if righteousness could be achieved by the law, then Christ died in vain. There's no reason for Jesus if there's another way to get to heaven, correct? Okay. So, I think everyone knows that God exists through nature and conscience. Now, maybe honestly you don't know that anymore, because if you have decided that you wanted to go your own way and you suppressed the truth long enough, then you don't know that anymore.
Not a decision.
Huh?
Not a decision. If I'm sorry to, it's going to drag on again.
All right, let me just keep going then. So, there's not anybody out there, Bob, who's never heard. Everybody knows there's a creator. Now, they don't know about Jesus, that's true. But they know there's a creator. Now, some say that those who don't know about Jesus can be saved by Christ's sacrifice if they seek God. Like the Old Testament saints, they didn't know about Jesus, right? They didn't know the name. But they trusted in God and were saved anyway. Is it possible that God still works that way today? Yeah, that's possible. But it seems like the Scriptures seem to indicate that you need to know the name. And so you might say, the more biblically consistent view is that God will get true seekers the truth in order to become Christians, like Cornelius in Acts chapter 10. He already was a believer, but God sent an apostle over there to get him the word. Now you might say, well, okay, but are you saying there's people out there who are truly seeking God and they never get Jesus? Are there such people out there? I don't know. It could be this, though. It could be that God has so ordained the world that those who never hear the gospel wouldn't have believed it anyway. We certainly know people do hear the gospel, and everybody in this room has heard the gospel, right? And some of us don't believe it. It could be that those who never hear the gospel wouldn't have believed it anyway. In fact, Paul seems to hint at this when he's on Mars Hill in Acts chapter 17. He's in Athens, and he says this, "From one man God made every nation of men that they should inhabit the whole earth. And He determined the time set for them and the exact places where they should live. He did this so that men would seek Him and perhaps reach out for Him, and though He's not far from each one of us," and he goes on to say, "in Him we live and move and have our being." Right? The point is that God may have so providentially arranged the world that those who never hear the gospel wouldn't have believed it anyway. You could have given them the word and they would have said, "No, don't want it." And if they haven't sought after the light that they currently have, more light isn't going to help them.
I mean, if you're in a dark desert, I mean, a dark jungle, and it's completely pitch black, and you're trying to figure your way out, and you see a beam of light coming through the canopy, but if you walk toward that light, you'll get more light, right? But if you turn away from that light and are lost in darkness forever, whose fault is that? Well, that's your fault. But it seems to indicate that if you take a step toward that light, God will get you the knowledge you need in order to be saved. In fact, there are reports coming from all over the Muslim world now that places that are close to the gospel are experiencing dreams, visions. In fact, Nabil Qureshi, one of the guys who was actually living in America, had one. So God wants people to be saved more than we do. Nobody's going to wind up in heaven who should go to hell, and vice versa. So since God is just, we trust in His justice and His love. We can't figure all this out because we're finite, He's infinite, but nobody's going to get the wrong deal in the afterlife.
Thanks so much. I want to say next month, well, actually, it's going to be May 3rd. We're going to be looking at the having our next book club then. I won't be here for that one, but Ron is going to be kind of stepping in for me. And Ron, introduce yourself real quickly. Ron Woodruff.
I'm Ron Woodruff. I love the Atheist Christian Book Club.
Long-time member.
The Power of Reason. I lead a Reasonable Faith chapter up in Collin County. And I love you guys. I love the way we get together. I do not come to next month as an expert on anything, only to moderate. But you, sir, will not be allowed to make assertions without evidence.
No!
What are you going to do?
You lost, I guess, right?
Okay, thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Help me,
Do we want to do